What's going on, you beautiful faces? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. This is about to be a breakdown of the 1997 Face-Off movie starring Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. There are a good amount of fun facts and Easter eggs in this super cheesy, wild ride of a movie, like how the entire thing actually takes place in the Jurassic Park universe. So brace your faces because we are about to break this thing on down right now, my nerd babies. Face Off was directed by John Woo, who previously worked with John Travolta on the 1996 action film Broken Arrow. And joining John Woo in bringing this film to life is composer John Powell, with this film being Powell's very first ever movie that he's composed after studying under the legendary Hans Zimmer. And we hear Powell's fantastic score as the movie begins with John Travolta's Sean Archer on a merry-go-round with his son Michael 6 years in the past. And before the production recorded John Powell's score, the song that was supposed to be playing during this tragic scene was apparently What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. But that was merely a placeholder track. However, little do the Archers know that Nicolas Cage is not far away, drinking chocolate milk with a sniper rifle. But unfortunately for Nicolas Cage's Castor Troy, he has to watch Sean Archer awkwardly brush his nasty-ass germy carousel fingers over his son's face, a familial gesture that director John Woo refers to as the love touch. But while Woo calls it the love touch, I like to call this gesture the creepiest gesture in film history. I mean, yeah, I know it's supposed to be foreshadowing towards the whole face theme of the movie, but like, freaking ill, man. Like, every time it happens in the movie, I'm like, "Ugh, ugh." But yeah, Sean and Michael's fun day at the park ends abruptly when Sean is suddenly shot in the back by Castor Troy. And did you hear that horse in the background? Like, why the hell did John do that for? Was the merry-go-round horse traumatized too? Like, what a weird choice. But yeah, with a big ol' hole now in his body, Sean Archer crawls and finds a dead Michael on the ground. Something that also appears to shock chocolate milk murderer Castor Troy and stops him from, completing his mission of sniping Sean Archer. I mean, considering all the chaotic madness that Castor Troy commits in this movie, you would think that he would just, finish the job. But nah, bro just left. What a dingus. But luckily, you won't feel like a dingus once you're dripped out in our incredible merch over at heavyspoilers.shop. We've got all sorts of fun, nerdy merch for you and the people that you love, especially our 2 new Full Power and Emperor shirts inspired by the upcoming Avengers Doomsday movie. You can find those and so much more over at the Heavy Spoilers merch store, so stop by heavyspoilers.shop today. But anyway, 6 years then pass and the movie brings us to the office of FBI Special Agent Sean Archer, Traumatized Edition. On Sean's wall, we can see the various awards that Archer has received throughout his career, like this 1994 Presidential Leadership Award for Outstanding Service to Greater Los Angeles. And we can also see that he has a Pinnacle Award for 12 years of exemplary service. And under that award, we can see another award from the members of the Anti-Terrorist Division for exceptional dedication, followed by a Certificate of Appreciation for outstanding and dedicated service to the Los Angeles community, and another appreciation award from a police force for his exceptional support and assistance. And after panning through the awards, the camera stops at a Sig Sauer P226 pistol, Sean Archer's sidearm of choice. Then we eventually see a computer screen with Castor Troy's file on it. We can see that Castor Troy is 175 pounds, stands 6 feet 1 inches tall, and is currently 32 years old, 1 year younger than the 33-year-old Nicolas Cage at the time. The FBI also knows that he has brown hair, blue eyes, perfect 20/20 vision, is right-hand dominant, and sometimes goes by the name Robert Matthews. And while his date and place of birth remain unknown to the FBI, they do appear to have Castor Troy's blue fingerprints on file, which we can see at the top right of the screen. And under recent activity, the profile notes how Castor Troy recently bombed the Pacific Stock Exchange, leaving 15 people dead. The computer then presents a new screen detailing the assassination of Croatian ambassador Alfred Evans, which occurred on Tuesday, July 12, 1994 in Berlin, Germany. The victim, who was 52 years old at the time of his death, stood 6 feet tall, weighed 257 pounds, had brown eyes and silver hair. And the damage report indicates that he was struck by a total of 14 rounds, resulting in immediate death. and the number of hits suggests that Troy may have had a second shooter, possibly his younger brother, Pollux Troy. Castor Troy's actions then led to the United States being blamed for that ambassador's death, leading the FBI to have expectations of a terrorist counterstrike in retaliation. So because of that, the authorities have been advised to monitor known Croatian operatives' activity and splinter factions as necessary. Then the next page details Castor Troy's killing of informant Leon Katz, murdered in a car bombing on June 4th, 1993. Also known by the alias Coy Katz, he was apparently 56 years old at the time of his death, stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed 286 pounds, and had brown eyes and gray hair. The damage report states that his body was burned beyond recognition, with Leon's head having been separated from the rest of his body mass, which is hardcore. So because of that, Leon's identity would have to be confirmed through dental records and a tattoo of a koi fish on his chest. The FBI believes the reason for Leon's murder was due to Castor believing that Leon had possessed evidence that would link both him and his brother to several crimes occurring between 1988 and the present day of 1997, mostly because Leon had become friendly with the Troy brothers through casual social interactions as well as business contacts. And not long after this, we head to the LA Convention Center and see Nicolas Cage's Castor Troy dressed up like a priest, setting up a bomb to blow in 264 hours, or 11 days. Why 11 days and not like 30 minutes? The world may never know. But anyways, after Troy gets jiggy to the Hallelujah chorus by George Frederick Handel, he heads to the Anderson Airfield to meet up with his brother Pollux Troy, played by actor Alessandro Nivola. The names Castor and Pollux are significant due to their roots in ancient Greek mythology. According to the mythos, Castor and Pollux were twin brothers. Castor, who was famous for his horseback riding skills, was the mortal son of King Tyndareus, while Pollux, on the other hand, who was celebrated for his boxing prowess, was the son of the immortal Zeus. The two of them were inseparable heroes that sailed with the Argonauts and aided sailors in storms and whatnot. And because of their ultra-strong bond, after his brother Castor died in battle, Pollux would actually persuade the god Zeus to let them divide immortality between the two of them so they could spend alternate days together in the heavens and the underworld, with the two of those brothers eventually becoming the Gemini constellation in the stars. That being said, with Castor and Pollux being the Gemini star constellation, it only makes sense that their enemy, Sean Archer, be named after the diametrically opposite constellation Sagittarius, also known as the Archer. But yeah, as he hops out of his black 1992 Cadillac Seville STS, we can see Troy's clothes blowing in the wind, a shot that was apparently influenced by 1962's Lawrence of Arabia, specifically the robe that the titular character Lawrence wore in the film. And as Castor's guards take off his coat, we can see his gold-plated SA M1911A1 pistols holstered on his back. And on the gun's grips, we can see dragons carved on the sides, a request from Nicolas Cage himself to represent his own birth year of 1964, which was the year of the dragon according to the Chinese zodiac calendar. But anyways, after picking up some chiclets and talking to his brother, Castor tells his security this.
And stay away from downtown on the 18th. It's going to be a little, smoggy.
This would imply that the current day is October 7th, 1997, as we just saw Castor set the timer for 264 hours or 11 days. However, as soon as the Troy brothers hop on their private jet, they are immediately chased by the FBI. And after Troy kills one of his FBI hostages, Archer decides to chase after him in a commandeered helicopter. And with Archer hot on his tail, Castor threatens the pilot to put the jet into the air. And it's around this time that we can see the initials JW on the control wheel, placed there purposely as a shout out to director John Woo. And hey, speaking of John Woo, before he got the directing job, Rob Cohen, famous for directing movies such as the first Fast and Furious movie from 2001 and 2002's Triple X, was actually the first director that was tied to direct Face Off. However, when the production went into a bit of a limbo, Cohen would leave the production altogether so that he could work on the 1996 fantasy adventure film Dragonheart. The production actually originally planned to use a green screen and other visual effects in order to bring this airplane runway chase sequence to life. However, in order to make things appear as real as possible, they decided to film the scene practically, including the plane's eventual crash into a nearby hangar. Like, most of the stunts in this film were actually done practically without any use of computer effects at all. And knowing that he would have only one chance to crash a Lockheed L-13-2925 Jetstar II into a hangar, John Woo made sure to film that moment with 13 different cameras, which is why we have so many different views of the crash. And because Castor Troy ain't no bitch, he immediately hops out the plane like Max Payne and starts shooting at the FBI guns akimbo, an element that John Woo tends to include in his action films because it looks super rad. Castor and Archer then have an intense shootout that eventually leads to the capture of Pollux and Castor slipping into a coma after being blasted in a wind tunnel. Screenwriters Mark Werb and Michael Colleary also considered having Castor either accidentally freeze himself or fall out of an air control tower in order to put the character in a coma before deciding on the wind tunnel. And after all the chaos, Archer finally heads back to his home at 326 Swarthmore Avenue, Pacific Palisades, California. And pulling up in his 1997 GMC Yukon, Archer comes home to the news that his daughter Jamie has been getting bullied for her weird new look and tries to encourage her to stop changing her identity every day, not knowing that he's going to do a fair bit of identity swapping himself very soon. Jamie is of course played by actress Dominique Swain in her first ever role. Actor and director Nick Cassavetes, who plays the bald badass Dietrich Hassler in the movie, would go on to work with Dominique Swain again when he directed the 2006 film Alpha Dog. Archer's wife, on the other hand, is played by 40-year-old actress Joan Allen. Apparently, the studio was not all that big of a fan of Joan Allen's casting as Eve, believing that a much younger actress would be better suited for the movie's main hero. However, John Woo would fight back against this as he truly believed that she was the right actress for the role. Sean then tells Eve that he finally put crazy-ass Nicolas Cage in the dirt and that he's ready to move past his quest for vengeance. The next day, Archer then heads to his office after receiving a standing ovation. And as he closes out the Castor Troy case file on his computer, we can see another report of another one of Castor Troy's victims. This victim was 41-year-old Swiss banker Daniel Cohen, who was killed by Castor Troy on April 23, 1991, after Troy hijacked Cohen's private jet to steal the $5 million Cohen had on board. And according to the damage report, Troy made sure Daniel Cohen suffered before he died, apparently amputating both of Cohen's arms before popping him in the head with Cohen's own gun. But before he died, Cohen apparently had blue eyes, dark brown hair, weighed 180 pounds, and stood at 6 feet 1 inches. After this, Archer then looks up the case report of the day that his son died 6 years ago on September 9th, 1991 at the Griffith Park Carousel. The same carousel that actually inspired Walt Disney to create Disneyland, interestingly enough. Like, Disney apparently brought his daughters to the Griffith Park merry-go-round and started dreaming of a park that both children and adults could have fun in. However, poor little Michael Archer did not get to have any of that fun at all, as the damage report details that Castor Troy's bullet struck little Mikey in the chest after traveling through his father's body. However, that doesn't exactly match with what we actually see in the flashback at the beginning of the film, as it is clearly Michael's head that has blood pouring out of it and not so much his chest. And this isn't the only inconsistency in this FBI report, because while the report says that Michael died on September 9th, 1991, Michael's actual tombstone says otherwise, listing September 24th, 1991 as his death day when we see Michael's grave later on in the film. But anyway, soon after Sean closes the file, he's greeted by Agent Hollis Miller, played by actress CCH Pounder of the S.H.I.E.L.D. fame.
God damn it, Dutch! What other errands do you have us running for the DA?
She hands Archer a disc recovered from Pollux with the schematics for the Troy brothers' big bomb. A bomb that Agent Miller predicts will have a fallout that will hit civilians worse than Gulf War syndrome. And in case you don't already know, Gulf War syndrome is a chronic condition that continues to affect many veterans of the 1991 Persian Gulf War, with a range of persistent and unexplained symptoms like extreme fatigue, muscle and joint pain, memory problems, headaches, sleep issues, and digestive troubles. And recent research suggests that low-level exposure to nerve agents like sarin acts as the main cause, leading to a massive loss of energy and inflammation throughout the body. And despite all the interrogation that the FBI does on Pollux, they know that he'll never talk about his bomb design unless it's with his older brother Castor. So Agent Hollis decides to bring Sean Archer to the Walsh Institute, whose exterior is actually located at the Wyland House in the Santa Monica Mountains. There, Sean learns that Castor Troy is still alive and that the FBI Special Ops wants Sean to undergo surgery that would transform his face and body into that of Castor Troy's. And what's especially creepy about the Walsh Institute is how they already had Sean Archer's exact body dimensions mapped out on their computers without even scanning him, which is kind of nuts. Archer immediately rejects this idea and attempts to get information on the bomb the old-fashioned way, by interviewing known associates of the Troy brothers. First, Sean calls in Sasha Hassler, played by Gina Gershon, and in order to get her to talk, he threatens to put her son into foster care, not knowing that his dumbass was about to be the kid's new father by the end of the film. And after getting nothing out of her, a frustrated Sean then interviews her brother Dietrich, played by actor Nick Cassavetes, like I mentioned earlier. Nick Cassavetes actually went the extra mile and decided to shave his entire head in order to play Dietrich the way that John Woo originally imagined. And John Woo never asked him to do it either. He just did it because he knew that Woo would dig it a lot more. So Woo was surprised when Nick showed up on set looking like Johnny Sins. But anyways, Dietrich ends up successfully rage baiting Archer, so that dude from Greece had to pull out the piece. A move that would only get him the date of the bomb's planned explosion. And seeing no other option, Archer decides to undergo the surgery, only telling his wife that he had to go away on one last top secret mission in order for him to fully move on. And naturally, Eve is pissed considering how he promised otherwise, and tells him to leave immediately if he's going to leave. And as Sean goes into his daughter's room to give her a kiss goodbye, we can see Jamie's love of music reflected on her bedroom walls, including this poster for Smashing Pumpkins' 1993 album Siamese Dream to the right of the frame, and right below that poster tucked away in the corner is another poster for American singer-songwriter Tori Amos. And we can also see that Jamie is also a big fan of the band Corrosion of Conformity, as a poster for their 1994 album Deliverance can be seen in the top left corner of the screen as Sean approaches a sleeping Jamie. And behind Archer, as he gives Jamie a kiss, is a poster for the ska band the Voodoo Glow Skulls, specifically their 1995 album Firm. Not long after this, Sean heads to the Walsh Institute for his big operation. And because the production couldn't actually rip John Travolta and Nicolas Cage's faces off, they had to use some next level practical effects in order to pull off the surgery scene. Luckily, they had an ultra-talented visual effects team that were able to create two incredibly realistic animatronic torsos that simulated the two actors breathing and sleeping.
The characters have to physically go through an operation, so we had to create two lifelike bodies that match to John Travolta and Nicolas Cage perfectly in every way, down to the pore.
They made a clone of me, which is terrifying to look at. You could trip out on it. It breathes and it twitches its face, and it's amazing.
We took separate life casts of Nick and John, and then later in a sculpture, we remolded them in silicone rubber.
Referring to detailed photographs, Yeager and his team recreated each actor's unique features. Hundreds of thousands of individual strands of hair were applied to the skin, one at a time.
We wanted to give them life, you know, so what we did, we put servo motors in the cheeks and in the eyebrows. We radio controlled them with transmitters. We've got jaw movement left and right, up and down. When the puppeteers are working, it looks like he's dreaming. He's sort of in a dream, rapid eye movement state. And then the chest going up and down, like, so they really look like they're, you know, Nick Cage or John Travolta sleeping. John came in and saw Nick's body laying in a hospital bed, and he just was floored. He just guys, you know, he just went nuts. To hear that from him was a huge compliment.
And after Sean Archer wakes up from his surgery and freaks out that he now has the face of a Declaration of Independence thief, he immediately is transported to the fictional Erewhon prison. Erewhon is of course an anagram for the word nowhere. Author Samuel Butler would actually coin the word in his 1872 novel Erewhon. In the story, a young English explorer discovers a hidden utopian society called Erewhon, where getting sick is treated by a crime punishable by imprisonment, crime is regarded as a curable sickness, and machines have been banned out of fear of their evolution. It's a satirical novel that flips Victorian values on their head to poke fun at religion, crime, health, and morality, while remarkably foreshadowing today's debates about artificial intelligence by imagining a society that bans machines over fears that they might one day out-evolve humanity, which is definitely coming. We're all gonna die. And when Sean first enters the prison, they quickly give him the lowdown on how screwed he actually is, informing him that Erewhon Prison does not fall under the purview of the Geneva Conventions. And in case you don't already know, the Geneva Conventions are the set of international treaties and whatnot that establish standards for the humane treatment of prisoners of war, wounded soldiers, civilians, and others during armed conflicts. And the prison guards also mention how Amnesty International doesn't know of Erewhon Prison's existence, with Amnesty International being the worldwide non-profit organization that campaigns to protect human rights, expose abuses, and push for justice for people everywhere. So essentially, these guards can do whatever the hell they want to these prisoners and not get in trouble for it. A set of heavy magnetic boots are then applied to Sean Archer's feet and the feet of every prisoner in the facility. Now, if you have seen the 1993 Super Mario Bros. Movie, then you have probably seen these boots before. The freakish looking Goombas in that movie wore these exact same boots. John Woo just repurposed these Goomba shoes to make these giant cumbersome magnetic prison boots for the film. We then head into the interior of Erewhon Prison as Sean Archer is led to the general population of prisoners. And to shoot these prison scenes, the production would film inside the Eagle Rock substation in Los Angeles. This substation was also used in a number of other productions like 2019's Captain Marvel film, where the substation was redressed to look like a Kree battle training area, and in The X-Files, where it was used as an abandoned nuclear plant in Season 6, Episode 1. And on his way to talk to Pollux, Archer runs into Castor Troy's colleague, Burke Hicks, played by actor Thomas Jane. But hey, speaking of Thomas Jane, we have a great breakdown of Thomas Jane's 2004 Punisher film on the channel, also featuring John Travolta. So maybe give that one a look after you hit that subscribe button, just saying. Meanwhile, over at the Walsh Institute, Castor Troy awakens from his coma and attempts to retrace his steps as to where he last had his face. Seeing the face of Sean Archer floating in a backlit bowl, Troy puts two and two together and calls his boys to kidnap Dr. Malcolm Walsh and bring Walsh to him. And as the doctor is brought before Troy, we can hear Castor listening to Pamina's aria by Mozart while watching footage of the big surgery. Walsh then asks him what he wants, to which Castor Troy replies,
Take one goddamn guess.
And I really love how they reveal Troy's disgusting face through the reflection of the doctor's glasses here. And hey, speaking of reflections, while wearing his gross-ass face makeup during the scene, Nicolas Cage specifically requested that he not see himself without skin. So to accommodate Nicolas Cage, John Woo made sure that the set of that scene had no reflected surfaces whatsoever that Cage might see his face in. But yeah, over at the prison, Archer finally gets a one-on-one with Pollux Troy, who immediately notices something different about his brother. And testing Archer, Pollux asks him what kind of medication that he takes. Archer, using his extensive intel on Pollux, then tells him that he knows that he takes a drug called Vivax daily. In real life, Vivax is the brand name for amitriptyline, an antidepressant used primarily to treat depression, anxiety, neuropathic pain, migraines, and other related conditions. Archer then improvises and pretends that his weird behavior is due to having just been in a coma, saying that he feels like he took a bad tab of Quantrex, which is a drug that doesn't actually exist in real life. It kind of sounds like a pill that your great-great-great-granddaughter would take in a subaquatic nightclub in the year 3000 to have a good time. And hey, maybe that could have been intentional, because the original Face-Off script was actually written to take place in a futuristic setting. However, when John Woo signed on to the movie, he would abandon that idea in order for the movie to be more focused on the characters and their dynamics more so than futuristic tech. But the one futuristic element that they kept from that original script was, of course, the magnetic boots. Pollux eventually reveals that the bomb that he crafted was placed at the LA Convention Center to Archer's delight. However, Archer's luck would run out when he is visited by none other than Castor Troy, Travolta edition. Troy then shows Archer a newspaper with the headline, Deadly Inferno at Walsh Institute, detailing how Dr. Malcolm Walsh, Agent Tito Biondi, and Agent Miller were burned to death around 2:04 p.m. the previous day. And it's in this scene where you can really see how much effort John Travolta and Nicolas Cage put into studying one another. In fact, before they were due to shoot, John Travolta and Nicolas Cage actually spent a full 2 weeks together in order to study each other's mannerisms and ways of speaking. And before deciding on Nicolas Cage and John Travolta for the film, a number of celebrity duos were considered by the production for the roles of Archer and Troy, including Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, Harrison Ford and Michael Douglas, with Douglas actually being the producer of the film, Bruce Willis and Alec Baldwin, Wesley Snipes and Denzel Washington, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal, and Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. And apparently Johnny Depp was also intrigued at the possibility of playing Sean Archer at one point. But that's only because he straight up thought the Face Off title was pointing to the film being a hockey movie instead of a weird face-switching action film. And that's actually one of the main reasons why the Face Off title has a slash in the middle. John Woo and the screenwriters knew that people would mistake this movie for some sports hockey movie, so they fought hardcore for the movie title to have that slash in it, even though the studio executives were convinced that the theater goers would be even more confused with the slash in the title. But yeah, after successfully rage-baiting Archer, Castor heads towards Archer's house, and as he drives in Archer's car, we can hear the 1997 In Excess song, Don't Lose Your Head, playing on the radio. And after greeting Archer's wife, Castor takes it upon himself to start reading Eve's diary, and inside that diary, we can see an entry for October 17th, 1997. And it reads, "Yesterday Sean was home early. I thought for once we were going to have a good night. Instead, he told me that there was one more thing he has to do and that he has to go away again. So it wasn't finished. I knew it was too good to be true. Of course he can't tell me what the assignment is. I feel like it had something to do with Michael's murder. What can it be? Castor is dead, or maybe he isn't? I don't know what to think. Date night fizzled again. We haven't made love in 2 months. 2 months! 2 months! 60 days! I feel betrayed, and I am very angry at Sean." And while this diary entry clearly shows a frustrated Eve at her wit's end with Sean, it also tells us that Sean left for his surgery the previous day on October 16th, 2 days before the bomb was due to go off. And this diary was actually a point of contention between the screenwriters and some of the executives at the studio. Because while the writers were of course down with the idea of a woman in her 40s writing in a diary, the executives thought the idea was stupid and unrealistic. But it seems like the writers got their way in the end. But anyways, Castor Troy's light reading would be interrupted by the sounds of James Brown's Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. And when Castor catches Jamie smoking in her room, we can see a poster for the 1993 album called Debut by the Atlantic artist Bjork on one of her walls. But meanwhile, over at the prison, Pollux mocks Archer as he is released from Erewhon prison by his brother. And during the time of filming, Pollux actor Alessandro Nivola was actually watching the 1994 documentary Crumb, centered around the family of cartoonist Robert Crumb. In the documentary was Robert Crumb's older brother, Charles Crumb Jr., who struggled with severe mental illness and agoraphobia in adulthood, largely living as a recluse. So after seeing Charles in this documentary, Nivola decided to emulate Charles Crumb's speech patterns for his performance as Pollux Troy. Castor then orders his brother to pretend to reveal the location of the bomb so that he could get the credit for securing it, immediately becoming a national hero. And to get revenge on his mortal enemy, he ends the day by sleeping with Archer's wife, a moment that movie executives wanted removed from the movie entirely because of how unsettling the idea was. But yet, as Castor Troy bangs his wife, Sean Archer decides that now is about as good a time as any to mount a big escape, which he successfully does with the help of some of his prison buddies. And speaking of these prisoners, John Woo actually made sure to include real-life former convicts in his movie in these prison scenes in order to make the environment feel more authentic. And as the massive prisoner Ivan Dubov dodges gunfire while helping Archer with his big escape, he crawls past a cabinet with an interesting logo on it. This is actually the logo for the InGen company, the very same InGen company that were responsible for bringing the dinosaurs back to life in the Jurassic Park movie franchise. So having this logo in the movie technically means Face Off takes place within the Jurassic Park universe, which is kind of crazy. Archer eventually makes his way to the very top of the prison facility, only to discover that the prison resides on a rig in the middle of the ocean. In real life, the location of the exterior of this prison is only 3 miles from the city of Carpinteria, California. And with Nicolas Cage actually having a near crippling fear of heights, shooting this scene at the top of this rig was especially hard for him. But he managed to power through like the action hero that he is, dodging gunfire from the prison helicopters in the process. And because they were filming on an actual oil rig, naturally the production was forbidden from having any sort of explosives or bullets actually firing in the vicinity. So all of the shots of barrels getting shot and exploding were done at the studio rather than actually on this oil rig. But speaking of Nicolas Cage being a badass hero, Cage is actually only in this movie because he got to play the hero of the story for most of the film. Actually, when he was first approached for the film, Cage was originally turned off at the whole idea when he thought that he had to play the psychotically maniacal Castor Troy for the whole film. However, when he learned that he'd actually be portraying the hero Sean Archer with the face of Castor Troy, Cage was interested in the challenge of playing both hero and villain at the same time. But of course, little did he know that Face Off would end up becoming one of his most beloved films of his entire career. But anyways, the next day on October 19th, the day after the big bomb defusing, Eve has to remind her fake husband to visit the grave of their dead son Michael on his birthday. Eve leaves Michael some toys on his tombstone, with one of these toys being a shark. John Woo actually included this shark on the grave as a shout out to one of his favorite directors, Steven Spielberg, who directed both Jurassic Park and the shark movie Jaws. Sean Archer eventually swims his way to freedom and steals a beige 1995 Volvo 850 GLT by yoinking the automatic starter from a valet. In the previous year in 1996, the film The Rock also featured a character played by Nicolas Cage that drove a beige Volvo.
I drive a Volvo, beige one.
And the production actually included this moment of Archer stealing a car with an automatic starter simply because they did not have the time or money to rig a car with cameras for interior car shots. So instead of showing Archer hot wiring a car from the inside, they opted to just have Archer find the keys to the car and shoot the scene from a distance. Screenwriter Mike Werb also included this element out of his own personal fear of someone stealing his car with an automatic remote, which is honestly valid because it's quite easy to do so. And hey, speaking of Mike Werb, in the following scene when Archer attempts to call his wife at work at County General Hospital, we can see Eve with Mike Werb himself as he plays the worried father of a young injured patient. And it was actually Mike Werb that was inspired to include the face-switching premise in the actual story, as he apparently had a friend that had their facial skin temporarily removed during surgery following a terrible hang gliding accident. And another inspiration on the development of the script was the 1949 film White Heat, as that movie centered around a man tasked to infiltrate a gang by planting himself inside of a criminal's prison cell. But yeah, the interior of the hospital that Eve and Mike Werb are in was filmed at the Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Baldwin Park, California. And after failing to convince his wife to flee the house with their daughter, he gives Castor Troy a call to let him know that he's free. And as Castor prepares to retaliate, he notices a red 1984 Chevrolet Corvette C4 pulling up in the Archer family driveway, holding Jamie and her sexual predator of her boyfriend Carl inside, played by real-life sexual predator Danny Masterson of That 70s Show fame. That man's in prison now. Castor does one of the few decent things in this movie by beating up Carl and giving Jamie a butterfly knife to defend herself in the future. Sean Archer eventually decides to shack up with Castor's associate Dietrich Hassler at his hideout, which is actually the Pacific Electric Building at 610 South Main Street in Los Angeles. And unlike the other cast members, director John Woo actually let Nick Cassavetes write a lot of his own lines in the movie, which is quite interesting. And as Dietrich leads Archer to the rest of the homies, we can hear the song Christian Sands by the British rapper Tricky playing in the background of the loft. And John Woo actually let the actors in this scene drink real liquor in order for it to really feel like Archer is surrounded by a bunch of drunk people. Archer then shocks the group by telling them that he intends on taking the fake Archer's face off, before heading to the bathroom to get slapped by Sasha Hassler. Eventually, Sean Archer learns from Sasha that Castor Troy had a child with Sasha named Adam, who reminds Sean of his own dead son, Michael. And apparently it was around this time that the production was initially going to show the audience a flashback of Michael's death at Griffith Park. But John Woo decided to move the scene to the very beginning of the movie in order to establish a Troy and Archer's rivalry from the jump. And as Sasha and Sean get more sympathetic to one another, little do they know that they were being spied on by Pollux Troy, who reports their location to Castor. Studio executives actually really wanted Archer to sleep with Sasha. However, John Woo really wasn't about that idea at all, because that dude was a married man. He wouldn't do that. Not long after this, Dietrich's loft is attacked by government agents, leading to an over-the-top shootout sequence. And at one point, in order to keep the little Adam calm during all the chaos, he's given a headset that plays the song Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz as sung by Olivia Newton-John. And John Woo actually paid for this entire over-the-rainbow scene himself, as that particular moment wasn't included in the script at all. Originally, Woo intended for Adam to listen to the song Puff the Magic Dragon, but he ultimately changed his mind and went from a song from The Wizard of Oz due to that movie holding a special place in his heart. Apparently, when John Woo was a kid growing up in a rough neighborhood, he used to watch The Wizard of Oz as a form of escapism. So he felt like giving Adam a similar feeling of safety that he got while listening to that song as a kid. So, John Woo decided to pay for the scene out of his own pocket after Paramount rejected his pitch for financing. But Paramount Pictures would ultimately pay him back after Face Off did so well in theaters. The shootout eventually leads to Dietrich getting shot in the neck, attempting to protect Castor from eliminating his own son. And because the Hasslers are a bunch of freaks, Dietrich decides to make out with his sister seconds before he dies, sending his ass straight to hell. And fun fact, that kiss was never actually part of the script, but was an idea that both Nick and Gina came up with together, believing that the two characters had a twisted kind of family love. Sean Archer eventually makes his way to the roof and kicks Pollux Troy through a rooftop window, killing him. And shocked at the sudden death of his brother, Troy then heads back to the office the following day, completely ignoring the news that he just made the front page of Time magazine. However, as a consequence of the high-casualty shootout, FBI Director Lazaro informs Troy that he's removed from all anti-terrorist activities, leading Troy to kill him in retaliation, passing the murder off as a heart attack. Meanwhile, a wounded Sean Archer heads home and surprises his wife with the face of Nicolas Cage. And speaking of the two actors, both Nicolas Cage and Joan Allen had previously worked together on the 1986 comedy Peggy Sue Got Married before reuniting for this film. Sean then attempts to convince Eve that he is the true Sean Archer and encourages her to test the other Sean Archer's blood to prove it. And later that night, Castor senses that Eve is tense as she works in front of her computer and attempts to manipulate her into staying with him. And on the wall next to Eve as she works during that scene, we can see what appears to be one of Eve's degrees from the University of Texas. And while it's super hard to make out, we can also see her maiden name listed as Evelyn Donovan or something like that. Later that night, Eve manages to steal a blood sample from a sleeping Castor and confirms that Archer was telling the truth. The two of them then make a quick plan to move against Castor Troy at Lazaro's funeral the following day. And the actual funeral venue wasn't inside a church at all, but actually a renovated 1932 bathhouse at Cabrillo Beach in San Pedro, Los Angeles. This bathhouse was actually apparently originally built for the 1932 Summer Olympics, which were hosted in Los Angeles. And after the actual funeral service, Sean and Castor eventually face off. And as they do, we can see that the church is inexplicably filled with white doves ready to fly wildly during their shootout. John Woo is of course famous for including doves in the scenes of his action movies, ever since he directed the 1989 Hong Kong action film The Killer. Like, John Woo always felt like doves are perfect reflections of the inner purity of his heroic protagonist's souls, so he usually throws them into scenes where the hero is forced to do battle in the name of their just cause. And before the shooting actually goes down, I love how the movie places Sean Archer in front of the church where the priest would give this sermon. Mostly because Castor Troy was pretending to be a priest at the very beginning of the movie, back when he had his Nicolas Cage face. So to see Archer actually stand in the place that a priest would be standing with the face of Nicolas Cage kind of brings things back full circle. And I also enjoy how, as Castor Troy approaches Sean Archer, he pretends to be Jesus hanging on the cross while walking in front of a stained glass image of the Virgin Mary, as that reflects how Castor Troy himself has used the face of a good man in order to erect himself as a false savior. Bullets and doves fly around for a bit before we get another one of John Woo's favorite tropes, a good old-fashioned Mexican standoff. And joining this standoff is Dietrich's sister Sasha, seeking to avenge her fallen brother. Gina Gershon actually really wanted to completely shave her head and be bald for this final confrontation, likely as a tribute to her bald-ass dead brother. However, John Woo straight up would not allow her to do so because he felt that would be super unnecessary. But unfortunately for Sasha, she would also die attempting to protect fake Castor Troy, but not before making him promise to be a father to Adam. Archer and Troy then start shooting each other some more with their infinite John Woo bullets, before Troy attempts to take Jamie hostage. However, that quickly backfires when Jamie uses the butterfly knife that Troy gave to her against him. And with no more hostages to use, Troy then decides to hijack a boat to make his quick getaway. And apparently the following boat chase sequence was supposed to originally appear in John Woo's 1993 movie Hard Target, but apparently John Woo decided to just use that scene here. And just like the airplane scene earlier in the movie, this boat scene was also filmed entirely practically. But the not so great part about that is how one of the stunt guys almost died after he almost got run over by one of the speedboats. Fortunately, he survived, but his leg got super swollen and messed up in the process. But yeah, a tense boat chase eventually leads the two crash landing onto a nearby shore. And realizing that he's cornered, Castor Troy attempts to damage Sean Archer's face before Archer finally kills his crazy ass with a harpoon gun. The movie then ends with the FBI finally recognizing Archer and bringing him into surgery to get his face back. Sean then finally returns home with his Travolta face and a 6-year-old child to replace his Swiss cheese son. And everybody hugged, and nobody talked about little Michael Archer ever again. The end. Just kidding, but fun fact though, the studio actually originally wanted to take out this ending of Adam joining the Archer family, as they felt like it was un-American to adopt the child of one's mortal enemy, which is stupid. But they would ultimately change their minds and film this final scene in reshoots because test audiences really wanted to know Adam's fate. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of the 1997 movie Face Off. What is your favorite moment from the movie? Let us know in the comment section down below. But like always, you guys can follow me at Mastertainment on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. But like always, I've been MT, you guys have been amazing, and I'll catch you beautiful faces later. Bye.